So good morning, everyone. Good morning to those online also. We were looking at the melachot of the melachos of Mochek and Kosev. Just as an aside, Jeffrey and I had an interesting discussion off group. So I just wanted to revisit this topic. I mentioned, whenever it was, when we first began the sugya, that I wasn't entirely clear, but it would appear that the Av Melacha of Kosev is when the information that the symbols intrinsically carry information, where intrinsically means because of it's a created sign or symbol that there's been a convention to imbue it with this meaning, like a letter, an ois, or a number, or the like. And then the tolda would appear to be that of Roshem, which would include something where the symbol doesn't intrinsically carry a meaning or only carries a meaning because of the context, perhaps underlining something or the like. That would appear to be the tolda. Now, there are a number of borderline scenarios where it's not entirely clear how to understand this. A number would appear to be classic Kosev. A number is a letter, really. It shouldn't appear to be any different. A picture which has some level of detail is Kosev, whereas a picture which doesn't have detail to it, albeit some form of symbol like a triangle and so on, would appear not to cross that threshold to be the Av, though it might be the Tolda. And then you have questions like asterisks and so on. Gary asked about vowels, I think, and laning notes, I think was the question. So Jeffrey showed me a source in one of the modern day poskim who assumes that these would be included in Kosev, that these vowels and chop would be included in Kosev. And I just mentioned that because I don't know the answer, but I would question that assumption. It doesn't appear to me so obvious. I don't know. I mean, you could argue either way. On the one hand, a vowel or a chop is more than merely Roshem. It's not just a line. It does carry a meaning. It's a vowel after all. It's a symbol that carries a content. But whether that carrying of the content, which only adds a nuance to a ksav, whether that's its own is significant enough to be an ois or not, I don't know. That's in a sense begging the question: is this Roshem or is this Kosev? It would appear, I mean, that music notes, one would think, should be oisius also. They should be the same as letters. A music note carries and communicates significant information. So you could write it as words, you could write it as letters. So music notes would appear to be letters, but we weren't able. I mean, the Sefer Jeffrey showed me is Rav Ribiat's so-called grey book. He's got a very nice book on Hilchos Shabbos. It's pretty encyclopedic. So that he didn't have a Mara Mokum on this matter. That's effectively what came out. He assumed it, and in the footnotes he brings from another contemporary posting from Shlomo Miller. So it appears there's no explicit Mara Mokumus. Maybe that's because everyone thinks it's obvious that these are called oisius. Maybe it's obvious that a laning note should be an ois or a vowel should be an ois because it carries communication. I mean, in English, a vowel is a letter. It happens to be a feature of Lashon HaKodesh that a vowel isn't a letter. It's a different type of symbol. But why should that not be an ois? You could argue. Similarly, if a music note is an ois because it carries information, why should the trop not be oisius? So I think one can hear the balance of judgments of these poskim that this is an ois, but thanks to Jeffrey's research to carry an answer to the question, we weren't able to find any more explicit sources than that. Yeah.
What about something that carries meaning, for example, intelligible to the eye, like fingerprint or QR?
That's very interesting. So those online, Karen was just asking about a QR. Yeah, Karen was just asking about a QR code, something that's not, or a fingerprint, something that's not intelligible to the eye, but does carry information. So a fingerprint should act as a place of a signature, I believe, legally. Right. So you can use the signature as a form of a signature legally. Yeah, or QR codes, which carries. There's a lot of discussion around.
I don't know how you could write a QR code, actually.
Okay, true. You could maybe write a barcode, though. Perhaps with great effort, one could write a barcode. Yeah. Who mentions fingerprints? Oh, Rabbi Ribiat mentions fingerprints also. Right. Okay. The question is, does it bring a source again? Because as we said, he mentions these other things, but when you look, and I asked Jeffrey to show me the photo, the Mara Makomis, and there wasn't source, he just said it was Farah. Look, it's important to point out, Rabbi Ruby at the end of the day is a halacha sefer. And for us, we're interested what's Roshim and what's Kosev, and the nafkamina will be whether you're chayiv shtei chatos according to one. There aren't significant nafkaminas in this. In fact, in halacha, if you're writing halacha sefer, I think it's wholly legitimate to write that a fingerprint is Kosev and laning notes are Kosev and vowels are Kosev. These are all no doubt correct halacha l'maisa. But whether this is an av or a toldar, and indeed one could maybe even speculate drabanon in some of these circumstances, it isn't. So I'd like to see what he brings in the footnotes. It's a phenomenal sefer. I mean, it's an encyclopedic work. So if you don't mind having a look, not now but later, you can see if he brings if he brings the Marmakum, that'll be very interesting. So the Poskim spoke about this also with respect to microfilm many years ago, many decades ago. So microfilm is where the imagery is shrunken to a degree that it's invisible to the naked eye. I mean, you can see something there, but you can't see what it is. And it used to be a way of storing information. So if you wanted to store masses of information, it would be effectively photocopied and then shrunk to a very small size. And then you'd look at it through a magnifying glass, and that's how information was archived. And in more recent times, the discussion has been about storing information on a computer, of course. So there is a change in the real physical world that takes place when you store information. The change, though, is magnetization of. I'm speaking as if I really know much about this. I don't, but the change is magnetization of what? Of something. Okay. The change is magnetization in your disk or whatever it may be. With CDs, it's etching of little craters in the material. But again, all these things are invisible to the naked eye. So there, the consensus of Poskim is that this. I'm not answering Paul's question how you would actually do this, but if you do it mechanically, you'll type into your computer. As far as the recording device is concerned, the Poskim assume this is not Kosev and probably not derisa. Sorry, not neither Kosev nor Roshim. It would be at most a drabanon, if that, because this is invisible to the naked eye. There's no ksav in the normal meaning of the word in it, as opposed to your barcode or QR code scenario, where there is something very visible, and it's a type of language. It's just not a language that you and I speak, but we could probably learn it. I mean, we could presumably learn barcodes and know how to interpret them if we were minded to waste a significant amount of time. So I don't know. They're very good questions. Okay, again, I don't know if Rabbi Ruby speaks about any of these other. I assume he probably speaks about computers and whether hard drives and memory sticks are okay. So I assume. Yeah, okay, fine. So those are discussed by the Poskim. Let's move on. I'm not going to go back through the Shitta Laran again. I think we dealt with it extensively last year, and I looked at it again over the week, and I have no answers or no explanations of what he's saying and how to make sense of it. Then let's have a look at the Rosh, a very beautiful Rosh on the Sugya, and actually very interesting Rosh. The Rosh says as follows: Tanu Rabbanon Kosev Eisachas Gedolah v'Yeshim Kem Lichtoy Shtayim Potter Machach Eisachas Gedolah v'Yeshim Kem Lichtoy Shtayim Chayv Amram Nachman Yosi Zechem Mechim Kosev, etc. V'Hainu Tama. So now he explains it. Kipa Omim Kosav. So he quotes the Gemara. Now he explains it. Kipa Omim Kosav b'Mishkan Torus al Keresh Achad. Homochek. So someone made the Torus on one beam. Homochek K'tei Lichtoy v'Cheres B'Mkoim, and you erase it in order to write another in its place. Min Hadin Hoyer Roy L'Chayiv Af Mochek Eisachas. Min hadin, one, as far as one would have thought, one should be chayiv for even being mochek one ois in order to write one ois in its place. It's not appropriate to be mechayiv on the machshavas kasiva more than on the kasiva itself. So this is a fascinating, really, really interesting Rosh. The Rosh says that the melacha of Kosev was only ever done with two oisius in the Mishkan. Because the whole point is that they were matching up beams to your aleph on one beam and aleph on another beam, based on one beam, based on the second beam, and that way you'd be able to get the sequence of, or aleph base gimel daled, and that way you'd be able to get the sequence of oisius, and therefore the malacha is only two oisius. He says with mochek, when would mochek happen? When you were mochek one ois in order to write one ois back in its place. You made a mistake with one ois, and therefore misvara, we should have learned from the Mishkan that the malach of mochek applies with one ois, not two oisius. Nonetheless, he says this can't be because it's not conceivable that the malach of mochek, which is a hachana for kasav, should be more chashav than kasav itself. That's the first point the Rosh makes. Very interesting sort of svara. And the Rosh here, we'll see this in a few moments. The Rosh is defining mochek as preparation for Kosev. That's going to be our discussion. The rest of the Shiur, we're going to be discussing that. But the Rosh seems to learn that the essence of the melachot of mochek is preparation for Kosev, and therefore he says as far that it can't be that the preparation for Kosev should have a more chamor share, a more minimal share than Kosev itself.
You're only hired with the mochek one because you're able to do a second letter to add to the first.
Correct. In a case where you're mochek ois gadol.
It's not just if you were mochek one. It's not just the mochek. It's the fact that you're mochek one to create this second letter.
That is true, but with Kosev, you're not chayav for writing the second letter unless you wrote the first letter. Whereas and therefore the Rosh is saying it doesn't make sense. The mochek it should be more than that. Yeah. So that's the first part of this Rosh. I mean, every line in this Rosh is fascinating. Then he says, you wouldn't be chayav on a pool of ink, so you have a splash of a mess of ink. You wouldn't be chayav if you were mochek that, even if there was enough space in it to write kama oisius. In the Mishkan, there was only mechikas oisius to write in its place. So what was the melacha in the Mishkan of mochek, where you're mochek one ois in order to write another ois, and therefore if you're mochek a tishtush, just a mess of ink, you aren't chayav for being mochek the tishtush dio to write another ois in its place, which is, in a sense, the Rosh is coming to say a sort of pshat in the Gemara. The Gemara says mochak ois achas gedola. If you're mochek a big ois, but where there's place to write two smaller oisius, therefore you're chayav. In other words, if you're mochek dio, which has enough space in it to write two oisius, you'll be potter because the melacha of mochek is the melacha of mechikas oisius, not the melacha of mechikas mess. As we find in the Mishkan, they were mochek oisius, not mess. Now the Rosh is going to be choser from this svara in a few moments, and the Rosh is again. Let's just read this in time, and then I'll comment on it. Achrei Kosti there again, very interesting just to have the privilege of being taken into the mind of the Rosh over here, because instead of writing his maskana, he takes us to his havamina and his maskana. It's very nice. Achrei Kosti there. After I wrote this mitoch svara through reason, the Gamid to knock up the price of Machat Oisachas, and for my diuk in the language of the Gemara, they wrote Oisachas. I saw that I was wrong. I saw in the Tosefta that this is incorrect because the Tosefta, right? The Kosev and the Tosefta writes, Nochlo Dio and Asif no Moch the Shaiva al Pinkos no Mochlo. If ink splattered on the book and you erased it, or wax fell on the booklet on the notebook and you erased it, if there's space to write two oisius chayiv. So the first thing the Rosh says is after I wrote this misfara, I saw I was wrong because we find the brisa that says not like me. That's even if you're mochek tishtush chayiv. And now he says the svara. I'm not clear on the reason. I can suggest the reason behind it. The ois shenichtav b'tois commands a lesser tamia. The ois that was written by mistake is as if it isn't. The ikar chiyuv b'shvil machshavas haksiva. The main point of the chiyuv is for the writing. Hilcha chafidu tishtush dayanami. And therefore, even if you erase a splash of ink or wax, is the same. And that which the price is Machat Ois Gedola is left after it. It's in order to keep parallel in the language, but it's not. We shouldn't make this diuk. So the Rosh says, don't make this diuk. Even if you erase ink, you're chayav. Now the Rosh is bothered. How can you learn this from the Mishkan? Because in the Mishkan they were erasing letters. They weren't erasing splashes of ink. The answer is that. The answer is that it doesn't matter. There's no difference between erasing a letter or erasing a splash of ink, because the letter is a mistaken letter. So it's chashivas isn't the letter. It's chashivas is that it's a mistake, and that you need to rid yourself of it in order to write another letter in its place. And therefore, it doesn't make a difference whether you're erasing a letter or erasing a splash of ink. So I struggled again a little bit with this Rosh. First of all, I struggled on a practical level. Somehow or other, the Gemara knows that mistakes sometimes occurred. Again, we don't know how the Gemara knows that. Apparently, this is obvious in the process of manufacturing, and integral to manufacturing is mistakes. And therefore, there's a remarkable Gemara that's Dorish, by the way, that is in the context of great figures who made mistakes. And the Gemara says about Ezra, that of Ezra Ta'ah, Ezra also made mistakes. How do we know he made a mistake? Because Ezra says about himself, Benoisi, I understood. Says the Gemara, Benoisi Michal Ta'ah. If he understood, it must be he made a mistake previously, because it's inconceivable that you can arrive at Bina insight and understanding unless you originally made mistakes around it. Incredible. It always rings in my ears, this Gemara. It's one of the Gemaras that rings in my ears my whole life. If we want to understand things, we need to make mistakes. So maybe the Gemara over here assumes it's integral to the manufacturing process that there has to be mochik. You and I would have said, where do we get from the Lamatas Melachos that mochik is one of the Melachos? I was assuming that mochik took place. I don't know exactly how they were lettering the Karoshim, but why couldn't there be mistakes that weren't a letter where you misnumbered them or mislettered them, but where the craftsman hand slipped and he made a tishtush which had to be removed. So again, I don't know why the Rosh assumes it to the degree that in the Mishkan we can assume mistaken letters were made, which would have to be erased. Why can't we assume that mistaken tishtush was made that had to be cleared out in order to make a new letter there? So I understand the Metzias Rosh. I also don't understand why he finds this such a big chiddush. He says, I saw the Tosefta and I'm wrong, that Mechik is also Tishtush Dio. I don't understand it, and perhaps, like tentatively, we can suggest the reason is because the significance of the letter you're erasing isn't the letter, because it's a mistaken letter, and therefore effectively it's Tishtush, it's a mess. The fact that the mess takes the shape of an Aleph is irrelevant, because an Aleph was never meant to be there. Why does the Rosh consider that to be a weak Svara? Now, I know the answer to the question, I just don't know how it fits into the Rosh. I have two extreme sadadim in my mind, two possibilities of understanding Kosev. Possibility number one is that the melach of Kosev is erasure of information, erasing information. The melach of Mochek is erasing information. Kosev is creating information, and Mochek is erasing information. So it's the removal of the information that is the chashivus itself. And now we have to work out how that's a positive act, not a negative act, because we already said only positive acts are, but there are cases where erasing information is a positive act. Great. So that's Sad Aleph in the melacha. The second possibility we have in my mind is that the melacha of Mochek, the chashivus of the melacha of Mochek, is part of manufacturing surface on which to write. There's a whole string of melachos which are really there as preparation for Kosev, the part of Sidura to Kosev, the order of Kosev. Like there's 11 melachos that are part of Sidura, the order of creating bread, plowing and so on and so forth. So similarly, shechting an animal, catching an animal and shechting it and skinning it and tanning it, well, all eventually to get to the goal of Kosev. So the chiddush of Mochek is there's another type of melacha in the Hachana for Ksav, which is when you've written something wrong, you have to be Mochek it. Now, to me, it seems the Rosh is adopting model 2, what I call model 2, that the chashivas of the melacha is almanas lichtov, as a preparation for writing. If the chashivas of the melacha is as a preparation for writing, then it shouldn't make a difference whether you're mochek tishtush or you're mochek another letter. Either way, you're preparing the parchment by removing the mistake in order to write something else in its place. So in that sad, it doesn't seem to make sense to be machalik between the two. In the other possibility, that it's deleting information, then we understand very well the chiluk. When you delete a letter, you're erasing information. When you erase and rub out ink mess, you're not deleting any information. It's just preparation for Kosev. So that would be a theoretical explanation of the Rosh, of the journey the Rosh is going on. Originally, he thought Mochek is deleting information, and therefore he said it's only when you delete a letter, not when you erase a mess. And his maskana is that it's the melacha is when you is in preparation for writing, and therefore it makes no difference whether you're deleting a letter or deleting a mess, because either way you are preparing it for writing. That's a very nice shot, but it's not what the Rosh says, because to me it seems number one that the Rosh already in his Havam understood it was preparation for writing. And number two, there's a subtlety in the language of the Rosh in which he shows he's playing with this idea. He says, since you're deleting the letter, it can't be that the chashivas of the letter is the letter, because it's a wrong letter. And therefore it's indistinguishable from tishtush. He doesn't say what I would like him to say, which is the whole melacha is preparation for writing, and therefore I don't care whether it's a letter or not. Unless he means to argue that you can't say that the melacha is deletion of a letter, because that's not a significant melacha, because it's a wrong letter, and therefore the melacha can only be preparation for writing, and therefore it doesn't make a difference whether it's a letter or not. It doesn't look like that is what the Rosh is saying. So you can argue with me. The one who wishes to do so can argue and say this is a good shot in the Rosh. The Rosh originally thought that the chashivas of the melacha is erasing letters, and therefore he said tishtush not. And his maskana is that the melacha is preparing paper for writing, and therefore mechikas dio is the same as mechikas aleta. I'm just saying, to me, it doesn't feel right in the Rosh. It doesn't look like that's the language of the Rosh. I'm not convinced that's what the Rosh means. It doesn't. The Rosh seems to be dealing with a more subtle argument, but that's the only way I can make sense of the maths of the Rosh. But I don't really. It doesn't seem that that's what's going on in the Rosh.
Do you think the Rosh has been closer on the Mochek Kosev?
Well, that would also be interesting, because the reason why the Rosh says Chosem Mochach, we could say the same story in one of two ways. Why is it that Mochek's share is two oasis, not one oasis? So you can either say because the whole Chashivas of the Malacha is preparing for writing, and preparing for writing can't be more than writing. Or you can say because the whole Chashivas of the Malacha is removing information can't be more common than creating information. And therefore, if the share for creating information is two, then the share for removal of information is two.
Mochek is more common than Kosev.
Well, yes and no, because we'll have to get to that. But if the chashivas of the malacha is preparing the grounds for writing, then it's an illusion that mochik is more chomer than kosev. It's true that if you're mochik one letter, you're chayiv, and if you kosev two, whereas with kosev you have to write two. But the reason is because mochik is preparation for writing, and you're removing something which is in the way to write two letters. So it's an optical illusion. It's an interesting sort of quirk of halacha. It's a nice quiz question: how is mochik more chomer than kosev? But in lomdos, mochik isn't more chomer than kosev. Whereas if the malacha is removing information, then elachanami, it can't be that removing information is more chomer than creating information. Again, the Rosh doesn't seem to go into this nuance, and that's why I'm struggling with understanding what the Rosh is saying. Yeah.
What side of the range of information? How does that square just with the simple Mishnah, which it is Mochek Almanach Lichtov? How do you understand?
Yeah, so the question Adam is asking is how does the tzad that the chashivas, the malacha, is erasing information, square the Mishnah that says Mochek Almanach Lichtov? So in a few moments we'll look at the Mishnah, but again, very briefly, we don't know what the Mishnah is doing when it says Mochek Almanach Lichtov. Doesn't mean the name of the malacha, the definition of the malacha is preparing for writing. And it's part of the order of preparation for writing. Sometimes you prepare for writing by skinning a deer, and sometimes you prepare for writing by tanning leather, and sometimes you prepare by raising information, but in order to be able to write then its place. Or is the Mishnah simply explaining why it's not makalkan? Surely every erasure of information is destructive, not constructive. And therefore the Mishnah is giving an example of a constructive way of erasing information. But that's not that the essence of the malacha is erasure rather than the essence of malacha is preparing for writing rather than erasing information. The essence of malacha is erasing information, just we need to find a way where that's a positive action rather than a negative action. In which cases would parallel other examples in the Mishnah. We've met this discussion previously. Korei almanas litzvar. Tearing is only when you're planning to re-sow. Is that because that's the essence of malacha is tearing as preparation for sowing? Or is it because almanas litzvar is a way of finding a positive rather than a negative consequence? So this would be part of a sort of familiar conversation that we've had with other malachas also.
That still has to be Almanach Lichtov. So you were saying that the range of information itself has hashiva because it's removing the letters.
If we can find a way to avoid makalkal, that's correct.
That's different to what we've had before. Before we had Korei Almanach Lichtov, it had to still be leading on to a tikkun.
But the tikkun with
Hashivas here, just removing the erasure of important information.
So let me make this clearer. There's two issues floating around here. One is what is the essence of the malacha? What's the description of the malacha? And the second is a rule in all malachas, they have to be metakin, not makalkel. With some malachas, it's easier to see how they're metakin, not makalkel, like baking obviously is metakin. And other malachas, we need to think more carefully what would be a metakin scenario. When the Mishnah says that mochik has to be almanas lichtov, we have two theories to explain that it has to be mochik almanas lichtov. Either because the name of the malacha is mochik almanas lichtov, the essence of the malacha is preparing paper for writing. Sometimes you prepare parchment for writing by tanning, and sometimes you prepare parchment for writing by erasing the tishtush, the scroll that's on it underneath. That's the essence of the malacha, is preparation of material to write on. The other model is the essence of the malacha is erasure of information. Now there's a side in that we have to work out what would be scenarios that make it creative as opposed to destructive, because of the general rule, the general principle of makalkel that has to be creative, not destructive. And now an example again, just a parallel to this is Korei almanas lichtov. Is the essence of the malacha as part of the preparatory stage of preparing material for sewing? Sometimes you prepare material for sewing by weaving, and sometimes you prepare cloth for sewing by unstitching or tearing. Those are different ways of preparing a cloth, but the essence of the melachot is preparing for sewing, or no, the essence of the melachot is tearing. How do we find a creative scenario of tearing where it's mekalka or not? Well, Masechet would be a good example of that, but maybe we could find other ones, such as chaburah b'chamoso, where you give yourself psychological relief by tearing. Maybe that's also avoidance of mekalka. So if I have a check, an IOU that I wrote to you, and I erase the IOU, maybe that's enough to stop it being mekalkel, because with removal of this information, I make the world a better place rather than the world's become more accurate, not less accurate, by removing this no longer true, or do I live in a better world or a worse world by deleting an IOU? Well, it depends on your point of view, but from my point of view, maybe that's a mataka, not mekalkel, and therefore that would be enough. So, unfortunately, by the way, I mean, I'll share with you the rayos and the poskim, but we're not going to come out with 100% clarity on this. Like we did not come out with 100% clarity on Kerem and Aslitzvah. We saw there Rabbi Kivega and Tosus and so on and so forth. Tosus seems to say that the melacha is al Aslitzvah, that's the essence of the melacha, and yet we have an explicit Gemara which Rabbi Kivega asked from Tosus that says chaburah b'chamoso is also creative and therefore enough to do the melacha. And the best answer we could come up with is that they're two sorts of melachas. There's chaburah b'chamoso as a preparation, and there's a chaburah which is not a melachot, which also it's unclear which one the Mishnah meant, and maybe they're co-told us or co-office of it. We're going to come out with a similar. I'm going to share with you what the rayos either way are on this topic. It's not entirely clear, but either way, mochek tishtush would appear to be a raya for this question, because whether this is what the Rosh means or not, we should file this way in our minds, this Tosefta of the Rosh, as one of the Marim Kovis on the Sugya. Because if the Tosefta tells you that if you are mochek tishtush you're chayev, it seems to be telling us that you don't need erasure of information. Even preparation of paper for writing, of parchment for writing, is enough to be the melacha, even though there's no information being erased. So whatever the Rosh exactly means, whether the Rosh is going on this journey of ours or not, certainly we can use this Tosefta as a Maramakim. The second thing I want to bring out from this Tosefta, I promise not to go back to my questions on the run, but now that we've learned the Tosefta, we need to throw this back to the run, is yet another pella on the run. And again, I don't know what to do with this. The Ran said that you're only chayiv for being mochek ois achas gedola if you're going to write in its place two oises of similar sort, similar font, similar size, and so on and so forth. But I don't understand when you're mochek a tishtush with a mokum to write two oises. That tishtush is not a font. It's not of any particular script. It's not of any particular size script. Nonetheless, you're chayiv. Why are you chayiv? Because you've been mochek a tishtush. There's enough place to write two oises. The Mishnah, the Brisa said mochek ois gedola. So Rosh says you have to say it's not dafka if we're going to fit this source with the Tosefta. So when you're mochek ois gedola, let it not be less than tishtush. Don't look at this big aleph that I'm mochek as an aleph. Look at it as a mess. If I'm mochek this mess, I'm chayiv because I can fit in two smaller vovs or yuds in Rashi script, not in Savashuris. Who cares? Tishtush isn't a font or a size that I can say it's only if it's enough to rewrite in its place. Unless the Ran held that this Tosefta is arguing with our Brisa, because our Brisa, unless he held back the Havamin of the Rosh. The diuk is good, it's dafka ois, not tishtush, because otherwise why did it say ois gedola, why didn't it say tishtush? And it must be our Gemara, our Brisa argues with the Tosefta. So all I'm pointing out is that this Tosefta, if you take this Tosefta as an authentic halachic source, as the Rosh does, then again this is a disproof. This is a critique of the Ran. This is a counter source against the Ran. The Ran again doesn't address this source. The Shiur Ran should have known the source, meaning the Rishonim didn't always have access to all the prices. They lived in a time where they didn't have access to everything. Prices were rediscovered, there were manuscripts around. But the Ran comes from, even the Meyuchas Ran comes from the base of Medrash of the Rashba. He's located in Barcelona, and the Rosh is a contemporary of the Rashba. They're both in Barcelona. The Rosh moved from Germany to Spain and Barcelona. The Shiur Ran is a generation later, from the same base of Medrash, from the same part of the world that we know about him. For some reason, he didn't see this Tosefta or doesn't comment on it. We don't know. Maybe he held the Tosefta wasn't relevant because he held how Gemara argues with it. But again, it's upsetting. It's difficult to know what to make of this run when we have this Tosefta. So I'll finish with that simply that this Tosefta again is counter to the svara of the run. And in Mitzvah Hashem next year on Tuesday, we'll look at the Marim Komis around this question of what is the essence of the melacha. Is the melacha a menasech or the melacha is erasure of information? And the first raya is our Tosefta, but we'll see what other rayas there are around some of the points that Adam's raised and other sources. So we'll finish there today. Thank you very much. I'll touch on the Rambam also next time. Yeah.
Is there anything to be medayek?
Sorry, Max.
I was going to say, is there anything to be medayek from yesh makomo, that expression where it's not almanas? You know, you just.
I don't know, because almanas dichtov, yesh makomo dichtov.
I mean, you're just rubbing out, and there's space.
I need to think about it. It's an interesting point. I actually had thought about it and forgot about it. Why does it not say it has to be almanas dichtov shtei yosios? Yeah. Thank you, Max. Okay. Have a good day, everyone. Thank you very much.